So we have Prescott Bush, whose banking career at Brown Brothers Harriman was closely tied to the Rockefellers' interests. That's the firm that managed the investments that supported the Rockefeller-backed corporations. Where did the Rockefellers get their money from? The Rothschilds. That's who their primary funders were. Same with JP Morgan, same with all these cats. I'm going to remind you that it was the Rockefellers who controlled, aka the Rothschilds, Standard Oil, which was later split into Exxon, Mobil, and Chevron. Yeah, they're all competing companies. No, they're not. Companies that intersected with Bush's oil ventures like Zapata Oil. Remember that name, you'll hear it again. Chase Manhattan Bank, led by David Rockefeller, was a key financial institution for the CIA-backed international operations. And it, of course, overlapped very conveniently with Bush's covert and illegal activities. Welcome to Far Out with Faust, everybody. I am Faust Chicho, and I am excited to be bringing you guys my much anticipated solo podcast special on the Bushes and the Clinton crime families. My God, there is so much to share. As usual, the challenge is to find the best of the best to streamline for you guys. Which, by the way, if you are a follower and subscriber of the podcast, please don't forget to leave us a review on Spotify or iTunes. We are trying to accumulate them, and they help at every turn. And if you're watching on YouTube, thank you so much. Love you guys. Please make sure you leave a comment and share the video. This is episode 1, and my question is, what if America's most powerful men built their empires in the shadows, long before they ever stepped foot in the White House? We must introduce the power of plausible deniability. Fast forward to November 22nd, 1963 in Dallas, Texas. Everybody who knows what happened that day. A president was assassinated. A nation was traumatized, completely in shock. And you may not know that in a quiet FBI office, a memo was written, and it stated, quote, Mr. George Bush of the Central Intelligence Agency was briefed about the reaction of anti-Castro Cubans to the assassination. But, my friends, years later, Bush claimed he wasn't anywhere near Dallas. In fact, he actually had the audacity to claim that he didn't remember where he was for many, many years, and denied ever being in the CIA at that time, despite what we now have, official records, saying otherwise. Makes you beg the question, why the denial? It was a FBI memo from J. Edgar Hoover, in fact, on November 29th, 1963, which referred to Mr. George Bush of the CIA, a young George Bush of the CIA, and how he was briefed. And Bush has many conflicting accounts. You know, he initially denied this being in the CIA, but later was confirmed that he was working there in the 50s and 60s. So why was Bush's name in an internal CIA memo if he was not affiliated with the agency at the time? Why would Bush lie? And why, in God's name, were so many people directly connected and affiliated and working with and for the CIA in Dallas on that day? This wasn't just a coincidence, my friends. There are no such thing as coincidences. This is and was a signature move, a tactic honed over generation upon generation. And to understand that, we needed to go back in time. Stay with me. So before George Herbert Walker Bush came into power, his presidency, before he was even CIA director for that matter, and before he even entered politics for that matter, his path to power was carefully paved. And let me tell you how far back that path goes. This is an origin story, my friends. The Bushes have been absolutely one of the most active gophers for the parasite class since their inception. They're ambitious little Luciferian henchmen, if you ask me. And they take their sworn oath to the NWO very, very seriously. Gophers are, of course, minions to the real power, to the real money, to the trillionaire. And they are selected very methodically for a variety of reasons. Let me tell you a little bit about this particular gopher family, the Bushes. The family has produced two presidents, which most of you will know. George Herbert Walker Bush, also known by Obama as Uncle Herby. I don't know if you knew that or not. Did you know that there's a blood relation there between Obama and the Bushes? Well, looking at his presidency, you might have been able to guess that there's a legacy there. Criminal legacy. Anyway, bear with me. De facto president and official president from 1981 to 1993. Of course, he was calling the shots when Reagan was stumbling around in there. And his son, George W. Bush, came into power just in time for 9/11, a.k.a. W. But we must begin, because this modern era begins with a different Bush, Prescott Bush, the Nazi-supporting and funding politician and banker. But first, let's go over the bloodlines of this family so we can learn why they were selected and elevated to be such prominent political puppets. Let's take a trip back in time, shall we? Father George and his wife Barbara were both descendants of Godefroy de Bouillon. Those of you who are into secret societies are going to recognize that name, also known as Godfrey of Bouillon. And they were noted to have held European noblemen in the successful crusade in 1099 to recapture Jerusalem from Islam, and then occupied the king's palace at what Christians and Jews call the Temple Mount. And that's where the Al-Aqsa Mosque stands today. That's the one they've been looking for reasons to tear down and rebuild, the alleged Solomon's Temple. Many of you will know what I'm talking about. Anyway, there's a long-standing desire for the extreme Zionists to replace this temple in East Jerusalem with a new Solomon's Temple, and it's not unique to the relatively recent Rothschild-engineered Zionist movement. A new Solomon's Temple is a goal of the NWO, and moving the American embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem in 2018, while continuing the systemic ethnic cleansing of Palestinian Arabs in East Jerusalem, have checked many, many boxes for the globalists and the New World Order agenda. And that's a fact. Now back to the bloodline. Okay, George and Barbara Bush were from the Pierce bloodline, and that changed its name from Percy after fleeing England in the wake of the gunpowder plot of Guy Fawkes to blow up the English Parliament and kill King James in 1605. Assassinating a king sounds like something that their family is known for. Bush ancestor Thomas Percy was one of the main plotters. And George and Barbara Pierce Bush of Merrill, Lynch, Fenner, and Smith are from the same bloodlines as U.S. President Franklin Pierce, who was in the White House from 1853 to 1857. Other Bush relatives might not surprise you. They include the Grosvenor families of England and America, the Tafts of Ohio. They produced William Howard Taft, and he was president from 1909 to 1913. Then, of course, the Delano Roosevelts, who gave us President Franklin Delano Roosevelt. And he was in office, lucky for us, side by side with Stalin from 1933 to 1945, making sure that World War II went down the way they wanted it. And also Theodore Roosevelt is among the bloodline. Now, I've gone very deep into this, and I've used David Icke's incredible research into this family, which is very fascinating, but it's a lot to get into. I'm going to skip most of it, but let's just say this. They were not chosen at random. They are of the ilk of the parasite class, of the Rothschilds and these families that have more money than anybody should ever have, the trillionaires. Okay, so speaking of Prescott Bush, let's get back to him, shall we? Prescott Bush, as some of you will know, was a Wall Street banker. He was a senator, and he was one of the main funders and sponsors of Adolf Hitler, and one of the, I don't want to say many, but one of the few American financiers who were caught trading with the enemy and had their assets frozen in World War II because they had been funding Germany and Hitler and using the concentration camps for the slave labor profits for many, many years. So let's begin there, shall we? I want to share a clip with you from one of my favorite documentaries called Everything is a Rich Man's Trick. If you have not seen it more than once, by God, don't wait. Go to my playlists, this channel, go to Far Out with Faust, go to my playlists, go to Faust Highly Recommends, and number one on that list, you'll see this documentary, which, if you have not seen it, make some popcorn, grab a loved one and buckle up, because it's a real history lesson. So let me share my screen with you so we can get into Prescott Bush.
Hope it will be plain to people by now that Hitler's economic miracle is the greatest myth in human history. There was no economic miracle. There are no miracles. And if there are, why can't the Germans do it all again now? If you want to construct a network of new roads and new steelworks and new factories, you need one thing: money. You need investment. And the investment didn't come from Hitler. It came from Brown Brothers Harriman and their business associate, Fritz Thyssen. It came from Hjalmar Schacht and his best friend, Sir Montague Collett Norman. It came from men like Axel Wenner-Gren, the Swedish multimillionaire arms manufacturer, and Charles Beddoes, the French business mogul. These people were all in the same bed with their Nazi friends, the Duke and Duchess of Windsor, the Dulles brothers, Prescott Sheldon Bush, and George Herbert Walker, with whom they'd created the Union Bank for laundering Nazi money. It shouldn't come as any great surprise that George Herbert Walker's family were slave owners on the cotton plantations of 1930s America. Walker was used to organizing slave labor. So while his business associate, Averell Harriman, was paying for Hitler's 500,000 SS troops and supplying them all with brand new Thompson submachine guns, because he did, Walker took over the management of this new Polish concentration camp. And when his Nazi friends started complaining that they couldn't pronounce the name Auschwitzium any better than I can, they all got together and decided they had better Germanize the name into something which sat more comfortably on Nazi tongues. It was in this way that the world first heard of Auschwitz. Because the truth about Auschwitz and the entire Nazi war machine is that they were essentially no different to McDonald's. They were American business enterprises abroad, businesses which the richest European families invested in, and businesses which, because of slave labor, made obscene profits, which Prescott Sheldon Bush took and placed in a blind trust, which later financed a Bush political dynasty, which produced two presidents of the United States, his son, George Herbert Walker Bush, and his grandson, George Walker Bush.
So for many of you, that won't come as a great shock or be very hard to believe. You know, we were taught that, well, America had invested in Germany, and that, you know, companies like Adidas, well, now it's called Adidas, and Polo and Boss and all of them, they were just, you know, I mean, how can you blame them? But, you know, if you poke far enough into this rabbit hole, you know that it was all funded by the same people. You know, you could go back to the Russian Revolution to make that statement. Wall Street funded it all. They funded communism, and then they funded the fascism dictatorship that brought Hitler to power as an answer to that. It's called problem, reaction, solution. And that's how it works. It's all orchestrated. Everything is a rich man's trick, which is why you really need to watch that documentary to understand the depth of truth that statement applies to our world and the truth about the history we've been lied to about. How can we possibly talk about Prescott and the Bushes without talking about the Skull and Bones Society, secret society, fraternity? Let me tell you, hopefully many of you have heard of the Skull and Bones, but if you haven't, let me give you a little rundown. Okay, the Skull and Bones is a deeply racist secret society, and it was founded on a fortune made from, no joke, illegal drugs. The society was incorporated in 1856 as the Russell Trust, and as a side note, by a special act of state legislation, its trustees are exempted from filing corporate reports to the Connecticut authorities. That's great. Like what? So this is a fraternity at Yale University. Okay. Now, the initiation ceremonies for the Skull and Bones to this day take place on an island in the St. Lawrence River called Deer Island. And the island is owned by who? The Russell Trust Association, along with most of the land that Yale actually stands on. And the Russell family, in case you don't know, a little bit of background about one of America's most prestigious institutions, the Russell family made its enormous wealth from the opium trade in the 19th century through the drug syndicate known as Russell and Company. And it is run with the strictest secrecy. I'm referring to the Skull and Bones now. from its headquarters at Yale University. It's a windowless mausoleum appropriately known as the Tomb. And that's where members meet twice a week during the school year. Now, if you're new to the sordid history of this family and their ilk, stay with me, okay? You'll have a clear picture of both their legacy and why it's necessary that I go into the Skull and Bones secret society, okay? The Bush family was initiated in 1917, and then they married into a family of financiers and wheelers and dealers, the Walkers, okay? George Herbert Walker Jr. was another Skull and Bonesman. In 1948, Prescott's son, George Herbert Walker, a.k.a. Uncle Herby, joined the order, and this was a move that would be exceedingly helpful in his climb to become head of the CIA and President of the United States. Yale and the Skull and Bones are also very fertile recruiting grounds for the CIA. And also, it was from his early days that Bush almost certainly began his career with the elite-controlled spy agencies. His father, Prescott, is legend within this order, okay? And I'll tell you why. Get this. This is crazy. Prescott is legend for raiding the grave of the Native American Apache leader Geronimo. This was in 1918, in May. Bush and 5 other Skull and Bones members ransacked the grave at Fort Sill, Oklahoma. They robbed it, and they desecrated it, and they stole artifacts, including Geronimo's skull. Now, how do we know that? How can we confirm such a juicy rumor? I'll tell you how and why. They took the skull back to the Bones headquarters at Yale, where they use it in their rituals and ceremonies. And their arrogance will be their downfall, my friends. This terrible story is told as an internal legendary history of the Skull and Bones secret society, and it was quoted to Ned Anderson, the tribal chairman of the San Carlos Apache tribe, when he was negotiating to have Geronimo's remains returned to the tribe's custody. In fact, a 1989 article in the New Yorker said, and I quote, "One bonesman recalled during the early 70s seeing perhaps 30 skulls, not all of them human, scattered about the tomb." What does that say about this Skull and Bones fraternity? Let me share a video with you to give you a little clearer idea.
At the same time that the world's rich elite began grooming Hitler for his starring role, they also became even more deeply involved in military intelligence. I say even more because the Dulles brothers, Averell Harriman, and the chief of Remington, Samuel Bush, a man referred to as the original Merchant of Death, had a relationship with American military intelligence stretching back into World War I. The lesson here being that the American variant of military intelligence started out with businessmen protecting their investments, just as if they were a mafia. Right from the very beginning, it had nothing to do with national security and everything to do with money. In Hitler, the Illuminati had found a ready-made stooge who could be the face of this autocratic new movement. And when the time came to put together a new secret intelligence service which was going to help protect all the money they had tied up in the German economy, these men also found one was readily available: the Order of the Skull and Bones at Yale University. Societies always seem to play around with some kind of skull and bones motif, so that it's abundantly clear what their mission statement is. These people are pirates, willing to commit any crime for big money. And they first became established in America at Yale University in 1833 with General William Huntington Russell and Alphonso Taft. Of course, being a secret society, they made other people curious about them, and in 1867 some undergraduates from a rival campus society broke into their headquarters to see what this skull and bones thing was all about. They reported that inside there were lots of lamps and candles, many dilapidated human skulls lying next to a fool's cap and bells, and it was morbidly dark because the walls were covered in black velvet. Having established a suitably satanic atmosphere, initiation rites were then performed on new members, who had to engage in group masturbation and sodomy while they lay in a coffin. Now, it's very easy to dismiss all of this as bizarre, silly, and irrelevant until you see the list of Skull and Bones members who have ruled America since Skull and Bones began. Although they only graduate 15 initiates a year, those 15 have always gone on to occupy the very highest positions in American society.
U.S. Secretary of State William Max Evarts was a Bonesman, as was Treasury Secretary Franklin McVeigh, Chief Justice Simeon Eben Baldwin, and the 27th President of the United States, William Howard Taft. The founder of American football, Walter Camp, came through Skull and Bones, as did the very first chairman of the Federal Reserve, Pierre Jay, and director of Standard Oil, Percy Rockefeller. Averill Harriman, the son of E.H. Harriman and founder of Harriman Brothers, the largest investment bank in the world, was a Bonesman, and so were both of the George Bush presidents. During his premiership, John F. Kennedy was surrounded by Bonesmen like McGeorge Bundy and David Acheson, son of Dean Acheson. Kennedy knew these men refer to each other as brothers under the skin. They swear an oath of secrecy and then ruthlessly vow to help each other's careers in any way they can throughout their lives, even if it means committing murder. In Britain, every literate person knows that all of the top police officers are Freemasons, because if there are 10 candidates for a top job, a Mason will always select a brother Mason for the post.
Side note.
Skull and Bones works the same way, and JFK took this problem so seriously that he even made speeches warning America about the danger of secret societies.
The very word secrecy is repugnant in a free and open society, and we are, as a people, inherently and historically.
He knew the people on this list were neither silly nor irrelevant, because he knew they were the real holders of power in America, operating as they were, as an unelected shadow government accountable to no one.
And that's why he said, I will scatter them, the CIA, to the four winds. That's why he spoke out against secret societies, because he knew that they had lost power. Eisenhower had warned him. And that's why, to this day, the president is essentially impotent. He holds no true power because the power has shifted from him to the corporate industries, and the agencies ensure that and enforce that. And that's why the agencies were formed by people like Prescott. So we have Prescott Bush, whose banking career at Brown Brothers Harriman was closely tied to the Rockefellers' interests. That's the firm that managed the investments that supported the Rockefeller-backed corporations. Where did the Rockefellers get their money from? The Rothschilds. That's who their primary funders were. Same with J.P. Morgan, same with all these cats. I'm going to remind you that it was the Rockefellers who controlled, a.k.a. the Rothschilds, Standard Oil, which was later split into Exxon, Mobil, and Chevron. Yeah, they're all competing companies. No, they're not. Companies that intersected with Bush's oil ventures like Zapata Oil. Remember that name, you'll hear it again. Chase Manhattan Bank, led by David Rockefeller, was a key financial institution for the CIA-backed international operations. And it, of course, overlapped very conveniently with Bush's covert and illegal activities. The Council on Foreign Relations. Many of you may not be aware of what that is or how long they've been around, but it's an NGO, non-government organization, and it was developed to essentially guidepost America's foreign policy. And it's littered with people like Rockefeller and Bush, and there's a lot of media present, but only, like most of these societies and NGOs, only the top people are really clued in. But I'm told that many of the CFR are pretty read in to the true global plan. And of course, heavily funded and created by the Rockefellers, and they played a major role in Bush's political and intelligence career and rise to power. The Bush and Rockefeller families, in fact, collaborated in shaping global financial policies, particularly in foreign oil and economic diplomacy. And we can't mention that without mentioning our legendary, infamous foreign relations guy, Henry Kissinger. Now, many of you who are younger than me may not have heard that name, but I call him the Kissinger of death. He is largely responsible for the grooming and shaping of George Herbert Walker Bush's psychopathic mentality, as well as America's psychopathic foreign policy, which can be observed by anyone willing to do the actual research and look into American history and what we've done in South America, overseas, and in the Middle East. It can only be called psychopathic. I can't think of another word to describe what our policies have inflicted upon our fellow human beings around the world. Speaking of George Herbert Walker Bush, should we get into a little background about him? And then we'll touch on our friend Slick Willie, William Clinton. We cannot allow this episode to pass without at least venturing into the quagmire and pretty deep and dark rabbit hole that is the Clintons' history. Albeit brief, but very, very busy. Very, very dense. Let me tell you about what my friend David Icke calls the psychopath's psychopath, George Herbert Walker Bush. Let me paint a picture for you, okay? This is the scene into which George Herbert Walker Bush was born on June 12, 1924. Let me remind you now that, like all of these families, Uncle Herby was groomed from birth and indoctrinated into eugenics. And eugenics is the belief that, particularly his genes, his family, people like him, white people like him with tons of money who come from these bloodlines are aloof to the rest of us. So there's a dehumanization process that goes on from early age. Bill Gates has been recorded, it's in the National Archives if you want to go find it, talking about in an interview that when he was 10 years old, his parents sat him down and had a long talk and started to teach him about the importance of eugenics. That's what eugenics is about, my friends. And so I want you to keep in mind when you're hearing these things that sound unbelievable for someone who some of you will only know as a president and, Poppy. I'll explain where that nickname actually comes from. Poppy, George Poppy Herbert Walker Bush, that was his nickname. But in order to understand his deeds or misdeeds, you have to understand the mindset to which he was indoctrinated so that you can believe that he has done, in fact, what he has done. He was raised to serve these trillionaire parasites in a long list of roles, and serve them he did. He was a U.S. ambassador to the United Nations. He was chairman of the Republican Party at the time of the Watergate hearings. He was the director of the CIA. He was vice president, also basically essentially president at that time, and then president of the United States for 4 years. And after all that time running things behind the shadows, 4 years was plenty of time for him to pass the baton to his partner in crime, no pun intended, Bill Clinton. We'll get into Bill soon. Let's just lay the groundwork for Bill's big entrance first, okay? Because we got to go into this to get into Bill, because guess who was that found Bill and plucked him? Well, it was Herbert Walker, one of the many people. So the Herbert Walker in his name comes from his grandfather, of course, another skull and bonesman. He was heavily involved with his in-law, Prescott Bush, in the funding of the Russian Revolution. You know, that revolution that was the catalyst for the death of, some estimates go 30 to 40 million people killed in a genocide that took place over a decade, over more than 1 decade, actually. And what I've mentioned earlier, and what you should note, which is particularly easy to verify, is the fact that the Bush enthusiasm and complete sponsorship of the expansion of the eugenics movement took place through a vehicle which is a person also known as Adolf Hitler and the Nazi movement. So when you go down this rabbit hole, you see that Herbert Walker Bush, you discover a long sordid list of family operatives, associations, accusations, and accounts of human sacrificing Satanists, child abuse, orchestrators of genocide, and Uncle Herby, as I mentioned, was a student of Henry Kissinger, a.k.a. the Kissinger of death. He was a poster boy for these people. The CIA's favorite bastard son. A family of tradition and deception. No, the CIA's favorite son. A family tradition of deception and crime. So, George Bush Sr., He publicly denied CIA association before he became director, lied under oath, which tells you what his word is worth. Okay? Raise your right hand and swear to God. No, these people swear to a different God. Okay? They swear to their God is gold, oil, and drugs. That's their God. So we know now from multiple declassified documents that Bush was involved, in fact, with the CIA in the 60s, probably earlier. His time in the Caribbean and Latin America in the 1950s coincided with some major CIA-backed coups, like Guatemala in 1954, and the planning for the Cuba debacle. Was he working as an intelligence asset while officially working as an oil executive? Newsflash, those two things are very intermingled. So let's get into Cuba real quick, okay? During the Bay of Pigs invasion in 1961, Bush's oil company, Zapata Offshore, was, I say allegedly, very loosely, and only because this is the world we're living in now, because it's very well documented and very well known that Bush's oil company was a front for CIA operations during the Bay of Pigs invasion. CIA-linked Cuban exile groups used the offshore oil rigs for secret operations. You could try and make a case that Bush was unaware, but it wouldn't be a case you got very far with, okay? So we know Bush was VP under Reagan. What you probably don't know is that him and Nixon were the prime orchestrators of the war on drugs. And in fact, and this is going to be a whole nother series of videos that I'm going to do after this research I've done for this one. Essentially, they were responsible for the drug trade in America and the then solution war on drugs, which is remarkable because it was one of the first campaigns that's really started to erode our civil liberties and rights, that they used the war on drugs for not only to profit obscenely, but to begin to erode at the Constitution and our Bill of Rights in the name of fighting what they said was poisoning our youth, what they themselves were bringing into this country, particularly people like Bush and family. Remember the TAPs. Remember the opium trade. This is who they learned from. They had already done this once. They had made vast fortunes. These European families had running opium, and Bushes were students of them. So, real quick, we have to touch on the Vietnam War and the drug trade, because that was the real purpose. Vietnam was never ending. The real purpose that Vietnam went down, it had nothing to do with communism or democracy, or it was the Golden Triangle. Was Laos, Cambodia, Vietnam, that was the world's biggest heroin supply at the time. Okay, Air America, the CIA's airline, running opium under the cover of war the entire time. Okay, so Bush was a covert intelligence operative, and he played a key role in managing the financial networks that sustained the CIA-backed heroin trafficking. I'm not even going to say allegedly, because this is well known now. As Nixon's UN ambassador, Bush had access to global narcotics enforcement and intelligence networks. And did he help manage the drug trade logistics under the guise of an anti-narcotics effort? Where have we seen this before? The CIA-controlled heroin trade in the Golden Triangle helped fund secret wars and intelligence operations. And who was Bush working for at the time? Oh, yeah, that's right, the CIA. And the same network that funneled heroin out of Vietnam would later support the cocaine trade in Latin America. And that's where our friend Bill Clinton will come into this very soon. Patience, my friends. Bush's operations from Vietnam to Central America, we're going to get into that. Stay tuned, okay? Now, the Vietnam connection between Bush and Clinton. Let me lay this out a little bit for you, okay? You know what? Let me share my screen first, okay? And then, because I want you to see a video about the depth of which Bush was involved. As I mentioned, the fake war on drugs. Let's talk about a famous, legendary patriot, Lieutenant Colonel James Bo Gritz. This man was one of the most decorated soldiers of all time. You're going to hear his introduction in a moment, okay? But he described how he twice visited the man called Kun Sa, okay? Kun Sa was the recognized overlord of heroin trafficking in the Golden Triangle. And Bo became involved when he was told that the release of the U.S. POWs, which were still being held after the Vietnam conflict in Laos, was stopped by American government officials involved in drug trafficking. So to his shock and chagrin, he went down there and he found this to be correct. The government obviously did not want the release of any prisoners because the prisoners might talk about the drug trade that was happening. So Kun Sa and his operatives in the Golden Triangle told Gritz the truth. Now, this is going to blow your mind. Listen to this.
It's only appropriate that we introduce to you our nation's most highly decorated Vietnam veteran, Lieutenant Colonel Bo Gritz, who will tell you a chilling tale about how the drug trade really works and how even Uncle Sam is probably a drug dealer. Join us. Commander in the Vietnam era, 62 citations for valor, 3 silver stars, 8 bronze stars, 2 purple hearts. Presidential citation are just among those decorations. General William Westmoreland devotes an entire chapter in his memoirs of his life to the life of Colonel Bo Gritz. It has been said that Bo Gritz is just simply the toughest soldier in the history of America. Colonel... You and I have known each other for quite a while, right? I gotta tell you, some of the stuff I've heard that is gonna go on tonight really distresses me. I hadn't seen some of the stuff that's going to happen, but I've been told about it. And if I didn't know you, frankly, Bo, I'd say you were a liar. I'd say you were a liar. And I'll tell you what I want to do. I want to show a tape that you made when you became the first American to enter the secret camp of heroin overlord Kun Sa. Now, if you don't mind, I've cut this tape up, so we'll take a look at part of it right now. And this will be the first time this has ever been seen on television. Would you roll that tape, please, and let the monitor out so my audience can see it.
President Reagan has appointed Vice President Bush as the #1 policeman for controlling narcotics in the United States. So I asked the White House aide, what about the offer from General Kunza to cooperate with the United States in reducing the narcotic and controlling the amount coming through this area? The aide was very slow to answer. He said to me, Colonel Bull, there is no interest here in that matter.
Colonel Gritz, what we have just heard you say is that in a face-to-face meeting with a member of the President's staff, that when you brought up the fact that you were going in to see General Kun Sa, and that he indeed had been shipping and is shipping 1,200 tons of heroin every year into the United States of America, and we had an opportunity to make a deal, we turned it down. Is that right?
That's exactly it, Mort. It was most disturbing to me because we didn't go to see Kun Sa about drugs. We went in cooperation with the White House. Tom Herby, a would-be Ollie North lookalike, was the NSC staffer that asked us to go. It was to find prisoners of war that reportedly Kun Sa was holding. When we got there, we found out that he had no prisoners, but we couldn't leave without asking him why he insisted on shipping this poison into the world. And Kun Sa said that the U.S. had been his best customer for more than 20 years. Well, I didn't believe it. This was December of 1986. He said that he was willing to stop 900 tons in 1987, and then he said, I will disclose every U.S. government official that I have dealt with in the last 20 years. We brought those videotapes back and gave them to the White House. And 4 days later, we got that response. Tom Hardy called and said, Bo, it's fantastic. You guys are the first Americans ever to go in and come out alive. And I said, Tom, what about the deal to stop 900 tons? That's fantastic. And he said, Bo, there's no interest here in doing that.
I don't understand this, Colonel, right? Here's what I don't understand. Why would this general volunteer to stop sending 900 tons of heroin? That's, he must be making a hell of a lot of money from it.
Kun Sa has 8 million Shan people in an area about 1/3 the landmass of Burma that he's taking care of. The only crop that he is allowed to grow is poppies refined into opium, morphine, and heroin. He wants to legitimize the economy of that Shawn land so he can become a true nation state. And he knows he can't do it if they're dependent on drugs.
What was his deal that he offered?
He offered a deal to stop every ounce of heroin, 900 tons last year, 1,200 tons this year, and divulge U.S. government officials if Reagan would agree to give him a trade mission to the free world where he could start using some of the resources they have there to make other money. If we would send over Peace Corps operators, if we would do just a number of little things to get him economically off of dope and onto a legitimate economy. Seemed to me like a good deal.
So here's the thing that I think is important.
We also offered to give this last March 15th 1 ton of refined heroin to Vice President Bush as a show of his good faith. And you know what the State Department said?
Well,
We're not interested.
I would imagine they'd say that right about now Bush could use it. Colonel, were you ever able to ascertain any of the names of the officials?
You betcha. And what happened is, I've got a letter here that Kunstau wrote to the Justice Department on the 28th of June, 1987.
Listen to this.
And if I can read just 2 sentences real quick. It says, during the period 1965 to 75, CIA chief in Laos, Theodore Shackley, was in the drug business. Sandro Travacante acted as his buying and transporting agent, while Richard Armitage handled the financial section with the banks in Australia. And he goes on. Now, Armitage, as we speak, is the Assistant Secretary of Defense for International Security Affairs under Carlucci, who was a Deputy Director of CIA, and of course Bush was Director of CIA.
Are we going to make American as cocaine and cocaine as American apple pie is, my friends? You're going to find out next. The Colonel, remain with us. We're going to dig deeper tonight. Stand by.
Can you imagine if they... Wouldn't it be awesome if they still had shows like that? I mean, like actual shows that talk about real stuff? I mean, that would be freaking incredible. So while Bush was managing the heroin economy of Southeast Asia, a young Bill Clinton was making a different kind of trip, one that raised even more questions than answers. Now, the official story about Clinton was simple, that he went to Moscow to protest the war. What? What? Who protests an American war from the Soviet Union? That is the shittiest CIA cover story I've heard in a couple days. So was Clinton on a fact-finding mission for U.S. intelligence? Was he gathering insight on the Soviet youth movements? What was he doing in Russia? And, you know, it also begs the question, how did he secure approval for travel when most Americans were blocked from entering the Soviet Union at the time? Were there early intelligence ties formed between Clinton and Bush-backed CIA networks? That is the question. And why did Clinton also stop in Prague, a Soviet-occupied state, months before a violent crackdown? I wonder what he was talking about there. That doesn't sound like typical anti-war behavior, you know, not from any activist that I know. I guess the trip was a mystery then, and it's an even bigger mystery now. So was Clinton an idealist, or was he being tested? Was he being vetted for a much bigger role, which we would later see him begin to play? All right. Finally, at long last, we're going to put Bush firmly aside as much as we can and talk about the scrappy young upstart looking for a patron. Slick Willie, a.k.a. Bill Clinton. All right? This dude is from a broken home, and he learned to hustle. He was born in an abusive home in Arkansas. His mom was ambitious and calculating, and she pushed him to be great. His stepfather was a violent alcoholic, and that taught Bill that power was survival. And by the time he was a teenager, he had already learned how to charm and manipulate and win people over by all accounts. Okay? Now, you'll notice when you research Bill Clinton that it says he was a Rhodes Scholar. But was he really a Rhodes Scholar? I mean, Oxford, England, 1968, what was Clinton really doing there? He never actually completed the Rhodes Scholar program, but history still calls him one. It's crazy. Was he recruited there? The CIA frequently recruits young, upwardly mobile students at these elite universities. Keep that in mind. Clinton's rise to power in Arkansas, if you ask me, a conveniently placed pawn, okay? He had very powerful backers. He didn't just rise through Arkansas politics based on his charm and good looks alone. He had elite oligarch sponsors. His Rhodes Scholar connections tied him to the Rockefeller-funded Rhodes Trust, and that linked him to globalist power networks still in existence today. Winthrop Rockefeller, former Arkansas governor and heir to the Rockefeller fortune, played a significant role in Clinton's early political grooming. Clinton's inclusion in the Trilateral Commission, and the Council on Foreign Relations gave him access to elite donors and financial backers, which makes him owned and operated by these interests. A perfect candidate to go on to become president, let alone governor. Now, Clinton and his incredible criminal history in Arkansas could not have been made possible without his wife, Hillary. This was an orchestrated descent. Now, Hillary's work at the Rose Law Firm put Bill at the center of corporate banking and intelligence-linked deals, okay? His firm, firmly involved in the contracts, some of which intersected with covert operations tied to Mena, Arkansas. And then we're going to get into that as well. He had a rapid rise in Arkansas politics, of course, fueled by money. Now, we are going to get into in detail Mena, Arkansas, the boys on the tracks, because it is one of the central events that brought this massive drug running industry in Mena, Arkansas to the public's eye, because there was 2 young teenage boys who were murdered. And then they had the audacity to say that it was a double suicide. And when I get into the details of that next episode, I promise you your jaw is going to be on the ground. But Mena, Arkansas is a big, big, big piece of this. And we're going to get into that because that was the headquarters of Clinton's cooperation drug running. And I'm talking about $100 million a month that were going through Mena, Arkansas. And then you'll hear familiar names like Barry Seal. Tom Cruise made a movie about Barry Seal. Of course, it had to be watered down because the CIA and Hollywood are like this. But, Tom Cruise has a big ego. So a lot of the good stuff in that movie survived. There were some scenes cut, I heard, like the scene with Bill Clinton and Barry Seal in a strip club doing cocaine, or at least Bill was. Bill was well known for that. Let me share my screen and give you a little glimpse. We're going to get into this very heavily in episode 2 and probably episode 3. Oh, yeah. And we skipped Iran-Contra. You could do a 3-hour special on Iran-Contra by itself. My God. Just briefly, okay. How could I possibly proceed without mentioning the Iran-Contra? We have to at least lay the groundwork for that. And then I'm going to show you a video. We're going to tease where we're going with Bill Clinton. Okay. So when Bush returned home in 1975, he received, a telegram from Kissinger and saying that he was nominated by President Ford to be the director of the CIA. Yay, amazing. And Bush held this post from 76 to 77. And, he was so fundamentally already involved in the CIA that this was just a stint, They actually, you may not know it, but in Langley, Virginia, in 1999, they renamed the headquarters the George Bush Center for Intelligence. So maybe he's a little background, little historical significance with the agency. The CIA, you should know by now, in case you don't, was created, like all government agencies, to serve the corporate interests, to serve the parasite classes' business interests. The CIA, National Security Agency, FBI, NASA, the Federal Reserve, the Central Bank of America, all of these are funding and organized criminal mechanisms as part of this global cartel that I've been referring to, and their secret projects, and their involvement in the drug trade was absolute. Its origins, the war on it, the production of it, the orchestration of it. Herby was not new to this intelligence game, and his connections with the CIA would appear to go back all the way to the 50s. So Bush's CIA operatives in South America, a very infamous Nazi butcher of Lyon, Klaus Barbie, the company he kept is every bit as atrocious as you can imagine, probably a lot more than you can imagine. Essentially, the CIA was exposed. selling guns and drugs, to buy and sell more guns and drugs to Iran, and then eventually South America, and the two get mixed up because they're directly connected. And so let me share my screen so I can give you a little idea of where we're going with this, with Clinton and also with Bush.
Bill Clinton sold the concept of ADFA to the people of Arkansas as a vehicle for creating jobs and assisting churches and schools. In reality, millions of taxpayer-guaranteed dollars were being channeled to Clinton's election campaigns, to his inner circle of friends, and to his wife Hillary's law firm. This may explain why ADFA had been drafted in such a manner as to keep its decision-making procedures secret.
If you needed $1 million, you had to get your application handled by the Rose Law Firm.
Hillary's law firm.
Pay them $50,000. There were 5 other companies in the state of Arkansas that were actually more qualified in bond structuring and applications, but Rose Law Firm got them all. I started checking around, and I kept asking, well, one thing's bothering me, to the comptroller, Bill Wilson, how do people make payments on these loans? He looked at me and said, they don't. He thought I knew. Well, that blew my mind. And this is about 2 months in, and it was getting tough then. So I started gathering the documents. After everybody left, I would stick around as if I were working on the annual report. That would give me access to all the documents, and I made copies of them all. For about 2 months, I watched accounts accumulate money. At the end of the month, they zero balanced. They're laundering drug money. There were $100 million a month in cocaine coming in and out of Mena, Arkansas. They had a problem. They were doing so much money in cocaine, $100 million. You create a problem in a little state like Arkansas. How do you clean $100 million a month? ADFA until 1989 never banked in Arkansas. What they would do is they would ship the money down to Florida, a bank in Florida, which later would be connected to BCCI. They would ship money to a bank in Atlanta, Georgia, which, by the way, was later connected to BCCI. They'd ship to Citicorp in New York, which would send the money overseas. And there was an interesting one, a bank in Chicago. That bank, by the way, is partially owned by Dan Rostenkowski. Dan Lassiter would get the bonds. He would become the broker for the bonds. He would transfer money back to ADFA. He never sold a bond. The money then would leave ADFA, go into one of the various banks for the specific bond loan, and they would zero it out. When they zeroed it out, they were giving it back to Lester, less their handling fees.
Okay, so that's from the Clinton Chronicles. If you want very, very specific, well-documented details about this money laundering, drug running operation, which very well documented, make no mistake about it. I'm still sharing my screen, so I might as well show you one more thing before we wrap today's episode up. This is my favorite, my favorite video of Bill. Check this out. I remember how many times he went to Epstein Island. Remember that? Check this out.
Fear of violence is robbing our children of their future. We must take away that fear and give them hope. We must give Alicia and all our children back their childhood.
Poor Alicia.
Working together, we can.
Do something now. Call 1-800-WE-PREVENT.
Your president, the president of the United States, not only was a part of a system that was laundering millions of cocaine dollars, your president signed off on it. He can't deny that he did. You see, because of that, there's one little catch. Every loan ADFA made, Bill Clinton himself had to sign off on it. More than Bill Clinton, you better identify the people in the loop of the drug running. You better identify the people in the loop for money laundering. And what you'll find there is those people go straight to Washington. Act 1062, if you look at it, it says that ADFA was developed and created to provide low-interest bond loans for churches, schools, colleges. So now look what happened to our legislature. They voted on a bill creating Advent, thinking that they were getting money to colleges and schools to buy books and so forth. What better way to run thousands of, tens of millions of dollars, launder it, clean it up, and use the cover of a state agency to do it?
We are going to get into the how, the why, the what, how that all went down in episode 2. And then in episode 3, we're going to blow the thing wide open. We still have to talk about the modern day Bush family, meaning W and all his connections, Clinton's connections to the Oklahoma City bombing, which are tied to Bush, and then also 9/11 with the Bushes. There is a massive tangled web that we're going to get into, but I wanted to tease you guys a little bit. Make sure that if you have enjoyed this video, there is so much more. I had video 1 for me in these specials is usually a little slower because I have to kind of lay the groundwork. I'm going to come back and fill in the gaps for you guys. I'm going to give you guys a lot more information on the Clintons and the atrocities committed under his watch directly in Arkansas, what Bush had to do with it. I've dug up footage from whistleblowers from way back, eyewitness testimony, people who shook hands with Bill on the runways of these deals, and all that is to come. So if you enjoyed this video and you're looking forward to part 2, let me know in the comments. There's probably going to be a part 3, depending on how this is received. But if you have enjoyed this video and my research into this very dark rabbit hole, let me know in the comments. Let me know on Spotify, iTunes. Write me a review. And if you are listening and not subscribed, please don't forget to hit the subscribe button. We are trying to build a channel. We also have a Patreon page now filled with like-minded, truth-seeking, freedom-loving, spiritual people who, if you can, please join that. You can support me there. And all of our podcasts, which cover things that are not allowed to be said anymore on YouTube, though that material lives on Patreon. Also follow me on Instagram. Most of you already do. That's the one. You saw it in the one video, the one Faust Chicho. Like the and one and then my name. That's it. And then follow our IG page, Far Out with Faust. Across the board, everything is all uniformed in its label. I love you guys. Thank you so much for staying with me in episode 1. Keep an eye out for episode 2. It's only going to get more explosive from here. God bless you and thank you.